Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and in this video we're going to talk about airlock strike indicators. Stay tuned. Making a video about indicators is definitely not an easy task because, for starters, what do I call them? Indicators, strike indicators, bobbers like my Uncle John. There are so many different names for these things, and then they're almost looked down upon in the world of fly fishing. I remember when I first got into fly fishing almost 30 years ago, whenever you were using an indicator, it was almost seen that you were probably a beginner because you weren't high stick nymphing or you weren't keeping a tight line. And then we kind of got away from that, and I felt that indicators were a little bit more accepted in the world of fly fishing. And then came tight line nymphing recently, and it just seemed like if you were using an indicator, you didn't know what was going on with tight line nymphing. And I jumped all in with tight line nymphing. I still use it really a lot. And I look up to so many of those individuals that are just such great nymph fishermen, especially some of those on Team USA and in the competitive world. And a few years ago, whenever I was just kind of trying it out, I decided I was going to fish just like them, and I was going to fish these pools, and I was going to have a dry dropper rig because that's what the competitive rules stipulated. But then I realized I don't fish in competitions. I don't have to abide by those rules. Strike indicators have been kind of recently re-added to my arsenal, hence why we're going to talk about the airlock ones. Now, whenever I think about indicators, there are so many different systems out there, some of which I love to use. Aside from these airlock indicators, I use cider material whenever I'm nymph fishing. I use little pieces of foam that I'll attach to my line that I can see underwater. I'll use the New Zealand strike indicator system. Basically, I'll try to use any system I can that will give me an advantage over seeing a fish strike, because that is something that's very difficult in fly fishing, regardless of what style you're using. You're really trying to figure out a way that you can detect that strike as quickly as possible without increasing any drag on that fly, just allowing it to get to that depth that you want it to get it to. Now, that's not always very easy, and with strike indicators, especially the floating kind, like the one I'm going to show you today, they definitely will increase the resistance or that drag and pull on that fly. So we're going to talk a little bit about that during this video. Yet, I want to really take a step back and say that a strike indicator, at least a floating one, is not one that I use 100% of the time that I'm nymph fishing. In fact, it's only used in specific situations. But I do want to stress that I use them, and don't be afraid to use them as well. The three situations in which I'll turn to an airlock strike indicator more often than not. For starters, anytime I'm lake fishing, especially for trout, and I'm using something that's just going to sit there, or just I'm going to move really, really slightly, and I don't need to have that direct connection, I'll use an indicator. Now, there's a couple interesting ways that you can use it, that you can rig it, but I love to use indicators whenever I'm stillwater fishing. Anytime I'm drifting from a drift boat, we'll say we're moving down a river or a stream, I love to use indicators, and especially keep them out in front of me, because it really makes things a lot easier. And then finally, whenever I'm fly fishing and I'm fishing a slower piece of water that has some depth to it, we'll say kind of like a pool, I love to use strike indicators, especially if I can't get my rod to help to lead my flies through that pool. So basically, whenever I'm fishing at distance. And will I use the tight line system to this indicator? Absolutely. Now, that's a whole different ballgame, but the gist of all those stories is that I am not afraid to use strike indicators. I really like these airlock ones, and as we talk about them, I hope I kind of influence you to enjoy them as well, and hopefully if you had any misconception or preconception regarding them, you kind of can get over it and start using these a little bit more. So to kind of get into this video, let's first change the camera angle. I'll show you a close-up of these ones. I'll show you how I apply them to my line. We'll talk about some of the things that it says on the packaging, and then we'll kind of finish up and talk about some of my favorite ones to use. As you can see, I have all kinds of goodies on my table. So let me just show you a little bit about these airlock indicators and how I use them. Well, for starters, this is the 1/2 inch indicator, and this one is the 3/4, and yes, that is Heather's favorite color right there. Now, you'll notice that whenever you take off this cap, there's a little washer underneath. And Airlock recommends that whenever you're placing your tippet or your leader or your line, that you place it within this gap on top of that little washer. So the most common method to attach these I'll show you based on this one. And no, this is not the typical line that I use. This is just some fly line backing, so you'll be able to see it on the video. What I prefer to do is simply take my tippet, my leader, place it directly in the airlock gap like that. Grab one of these caps and screw it on. Now, I tend to tighten it, and I probably over tighten it at times against that washer because I do not want this indicator to slip at all whenever it's in my line. Now, the one nice thing about all of this is that you can simply just kind of loosen it a little bit and then slide your indicator anywhere that you need to on your line, depending on the depth and on how deep you want your flies running. Now, kind of keep in mind that if you're sliding it up and down your line and you come to a spot, and in this case, I just put on a quick blood knot, so you hit that knot, a lot of the times that blood knot will not pass through that indicator. So you will have to take this little top off. And be very careful when you're doing so, because I have lost a few of these over the last few years. It just seems like more recently that I've lost them, but kind of be cognizant of that. Now, the other kind of component, or the other kind of facet of all this that I want to mention, is that airlock also talks about this thing called a 90-degree connection. So if you take a peek here, you can see that I have my line, and let's pretend this is my line that would go towards my fly rod, towards my fly reel. And this is the one that would go and it would connect to my fly. And they call it a 90-degree connection, because if you look at it, you can see that instead of placing the line directly in that gap, what you would first do, let me see if I over tighten this one. You would place your line through one of these caps, and then you would place the line, again, the line going to your reel, you would place it in the gap. See if I can do this. Place the cap on top and screw it in place. Then you have kind of a, we'll say, a connection in which your line going to your fly is definitely a little bit more directly below the indicator. Now, why is that important? In my mind, that would be important if you were going to fish in that lake situation where it's you want to know for sure that that fly is nearly just directly down below your indicator. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. How do I fish it? If I'm in the lake, I tend to definitely fish more like that 90-degree connection, and occasionally I'll do so whenever I'm fishing in moving water as well. Versus, I don't know, I can't even tell you the percentage of the time. If you're seeing me using one of these airlock indicators, then, geez, at least 75% of the time I have it straight through. Now, the main reason I prefer to have it straight, I love the notion of that 90-degree, but what I also love is knowing that whenever I have this cap screwed down, that I'm hitting that tippet the whole way through, and it really will lock in place. Because this is called an airlock, and I want to make sure that whenever I have it in that specified location on my tippet, it's not going to move at all. So kind of keep all those little tips in mind whenever you're figuring out how to rig your own. Definitely look at the bottom of the package, because they include some of these little extra caps. And once again, if you're thinking about the different sizes, I'll grab this pink one and I'll put it next to the clear one. The pink one is a 3/4, the clear one is a 1/2 inch. And then here's a couple other colors that come in that multi-pack that I've been showing you throughout this video. So that's just a little overview I'll kind of share with you. I've shared with you how I use these airlock indicators. Now let me change the camera angle one more time, and I'll talk just a little bit more about this system. Okay, we've talked about the situations in which I like to use these strike indicators. I've shown you how to rig them, and now let me tell you which ones I prefer to use. So the packaging in this video was a 3-pack multicolored, and the size was a 1/2 inch. I love to use that 1/2 inch size. It's the smallest one for airlock indicators, and I just feel that it has less resistance than some of the larger sizes, thus it's pulling the flies a little less. The color that I like to use is white. Now that was a 3-pack. It had white, hot pink, and I think orange in it. I like the white just because it seems a little bit more natural. Maybe it won't be so obvious to fish. They also sell a clear color, and I love that one too. Now my wife Heather, anytime she's out fly fishing with me and we come to a situation in which we put on a strike indicator, she is always going to that hot pink one. Is it because she can see it better? That's what she tells me, but I know she loves the color pink, thus that's the one she goes with. She still does catch fish while using it, so it's not scaring them all away. So if that's the only color you have, fish it with confidence, it will still work. In those really pressured situations though, I would go clear and I would go white. Those are kind of the two that I would lead you to in that 1/2 inch size. There are times where I'll bump up to a 3/4 inch size simply because I have a lot of weight on and maybe it's starting to pull my indicator underwater. There are situations in which I don't mind it pulling that indicator underwater. In fact, there's a pool that I love to fish that I'll put on an indicator, I'll put on really heavy flies, and that indicator will actually get drugged underneath. And anytime it twitches, I know I'm either on bottom or I have a fish. So I love to fish that situation, especially with some drop shotting too. It just works deadly. So the indicator system is something that I like. Are there other indicators out there that I use? Absolutely. The Airlock is that floating strike indicator that I've been turning to just because it doesn't seem to damage my leader so much. It's really easy to use. Are there some shortcomings? Sure. As I said earlier, whenever you look at those little caps, those things are just so easy to just drop in the water. And I've lost a few of them over the years, but they're easy to replace. And typically in the packaging, they send you a couple extra ones because they know you're probably going to drop one. It seemed like the first 3 years I used them, I never dropped one of those. Yet over the last couple seasons, I can't tell you how many my wife and I have dropped when we're on the water, kind of throwing them back and forth. So as a little tip, don't throw those nuts back and forth. And then finally, where do you purchase these? You can find the Airlock strike indicators online. I'm not going to recommend a specific fly shop. Check your local fly shop, see if they have them. Sometimes when you're at the fly fishing shows or any type of, we'll say a fly fishing event, there's sometimes that vendors will sell them just individually for $1, $1.50 a piece. That's great. I don't want to tell you what a 3-pack or a 5-pack costs because those prices really, they seem to fluctuate depending on where you're getting them from, but kind of go with the ones that will really suit your fishing, the size and the color. Go from there, try it out if you haven't tried them, and let me know what you think because I'd love to know, is there another system out there that I haven't mentioned that you turn to on a regular basis and you have confidence in it? Because I know there are all kinds of indicator systems out there, not just floating, but indicator systems. And those are things that I love to use, especially if they're going to help me catch more fish. Well, thank you everyone for watching this video on the Airlock strike indicators. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below in the comment section, or you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. If you want to watch more videos like this, check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. Once there, you can scroll down to the bottom. I have a little mailing address where you can enter your email list or your email address, and I send out monthly updates with fly tying tips, pictures and video updates, and just other fun stuff like that, sometimes behind the scenes. Other behind the scenes stuff or more fishing related stuff you can find on my social media. You can find Trout and Feather on Instagram and on Facebook. So if you can like the Facebook page, I would greatly appreciate it. And as I said a few times now, thank you to all of you who are sharing my videos on Facebook. It really means a lot to me to see that you're actually liking them enough to share them with your friends. Anytime you do that, please tag me just to let me know because it really does mean a lot to me to know that you value them. So thank you very much. And thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see all of you next time.